Commission did not receive federal approval to operate Interstate 80 as a toll road. Quite frankly, I remain skeptical of the P3 proposal. We gathered a diverse group of witnesses who will give us their perspectives on how this proposal will affect the lives of Pennsylvanians and our local economies if implemented. I look forward to the discussion today and hope this working group can come together and identify viable solutions to address our infrastructure across the Commonwealth. If I may, I'd like to go over the ground rules for this hearing. Each witness will be given 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. The 5-minute rule will be enforced by the use of a timer. When you hear the timer go off, please conclude your opening statement as quickly as possible. After the opening statement from each panel of witnesses, each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions. The timer will also be used for the questioning section. Today, we're receiving testimony from 2 panels. The first panel, we will receive testimony virtually from PennDOT Secretary Yasmin Gramian. For the second panel, we'll receive testimony from Rebecca Euler of the Pennsylvania Motor Trucking Association, Stephanie Kane of the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates, Tracy Becker of the Clarion Area Chamber of Business and Industry, and Greg Lander of Claypick Trucking Company. And with that, I'd like to introduce Secretary Gramian. Secretary Gramian serves as the Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. She was confirmed unanimously by the Senate on May 27th, 2020. Secretary Gramian has more than 30 years of experience in operations, design, and management of transportation infrastructure systems. Prior to joining PennDOT, she served as Senior Vice President and Business Development Director for a leading international engineering firm. Additionally, she previously served as Senior Vice President for a global architecture, civil engineering, and construction management firm with responsibility for operations across Pennsylvania. Secretary Gramian earned her master's and bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Michigan and completed the Tuck Management Training Program at Dartmouth College. Secretary Gramian, welcome and thank you for participating today. And I now recognize you for 5 minutes to provide your opening statement.
Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. As communicated before, I have a previous commitment with the governor and the cabinet members, so I need to leave after sharing the department's perspective. But I wanted to talk to you about the this important topic. My written testimony goes into details on the need for the major bridge P3 initiative, how we pursued it, and what happens without it. I will explain those same needs and consequences now. You're aware that we have the second highest gas tax, and you indicated that in the nation. 74% of our highway and bridge funding revenues come from state and gas taxes. And while it was much needed, Act 89 did not meet the needs defined by the Transportation Funding Advisory Commission, and nor did it adjust to the gas tax for inflation. And since then, those unmet needs have continued to grow. I'm very encouraged by the Biden administration's announcement yesterday on infrastructure funding. It's much needed. The federal government hasn't taken meaningful action on transportation since 1993, and our latest projections show our annual highway and bridge funding gap is about $8.1 billion. We've modernized operations and found efficiencies. PennDOT's workforce was reduced from over 20,000 back in late 70s to currently 11,500 employees. But efficiencies and any potential federal assistance will not fill such a large gap. As you're aware, gas taxes have become a less predictable source of revenue. This will go beyond passenger vehicles. FedEx announced last month that by 2025, half of its delivery fleet vehicles purchases will be electrical vehicles. The president's proposal also includes major investment in EV market through rebate programs, tax incentives to buy American-made EVs, grants and programs for states to build charging stations. These are just a few that I can mention. These are some of the examples of an unavoidable reality. We must find reliable short and long-term funding solutions. And I'm very pleased that the governor has established the Transportation Revenue Option Commission. I'm honored to serve as the commission's chair, and we held our first meeting last week. The governor's stated goal is to phase out the gas tax. department and the commission need to pursue solutions that not only fill that gap, but also meet our unmet needs. That's why in October of last year, I created the Office of Alternative Funding. And this office developed an alternative funding program for PennDOT and will investigate various alternative funding strategies. Last year, we launched a statewide planning and environmental linkages study. This document will serve as the programmatic framework for how PennDOT will study and potentially implement various alternative funding strategies. I must note that based on our current state and federal laws, most potential strategies would require a P3 delivery model, since they would implement user fees. The Pell had an initial round of public comment in November and December. The draft report will be available for a second round of public comment in late April and is expected to be finalized in July. And the first short-term alternative concept coming out of PennDOT Pathways program is the Major Bridge P3 initiative that you mentioned. And on November 12th, the Pennsylvania P3 board, which includes legislators and their appointees, approved this project. Before that board meeting, we met with the legislative leadership in all 4 chambers, as well as the chairs of the transportation committees. And on the day of the approval, PennDOT provided the legislature with notice of the board's action, press release, P3 slide deck, and FAQ list about the project. The initiative will replace or rehabilitate major bridges through the design, build, finance, operate, and maintain method of P3 delivery. If a bridge wouldn't, the projects would pay for themselves with toll revenues, and private investment will allow us to start faster than through our normal process. And if a bridge wouldn't generate enough toll revenue, at a reasonable toll rate to fund its construction and maintenance, it will not be included in this program. Additionally, the project will provide a relief to the Interstate Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP program at the interstate level and the TIP program at the regional level, which is very important to us. This project also ensures all users, whether local or through traffic, contribute fairly to the replacement or rehabilitation of the bridges based on the usage, while their fuel tax dollars go towards other improvements. We announced 9 candidate bridges for this initiative. You mentioned 2 of them. Each bridge is currently undergoing a thorough economic evaluation to ensure it pays for itself through the implementation of a reasonable toll rate. In addition to the public input I mentioned earlier, PennDOT is required by the National Environmental Policy Act to conduct public outreach for each of these candidate locations. Through this process, special emphasis will be placed by identifying and evaluating economic impacts to underserved population, as well as direct and indirect impacts of potential diversion from tolls. And if needed, appropriate mitigation strategies will be deployed in conjunction with these federally mandated environmental studies. So what are the benefits? I'd now like to discuss some of the benefits and the consequences. Our partners in the trucking industry often cite our gas tax as a challenge. If we are to move away from this unreliable funding source, solutions like this P3 initiative must be pursued. Freight carriers see the benefits of action and results of inaction. Many of our bridges are over 50 years old. They were not designed to carry the size of today's legal loads. We are a key link for freight traveling across the nation to distributors on the East Coast, but Pennsylvania is currently home to 7 of the top 100 freight bottlenecks in the nation. Delays caused by the traffic congestion alone is costing motorists $160 billion a year. Motorists are paying over $1,000 every year in wasted time and fuel. Part of the reason for these bridge network problems that they're having is because of the lane closures and emergency repairs that's required. We cannot get there with the last century. We cannot fix our problems with the last century funding models or borrowing our way forward. We know that the state economy benefits from transportation investment. This program will deliver upward of $2.2 billion of bridge construction for much needed projects that would otherwise need to be funded through our current design and construction program. This will result in increased business opportunities for contractors, suppliers, engineers, above and beyond PennDOT's normal letting program. Every $1 billion invested in bridge replacement or rehabilitation creates over 10,500 jobs and generates over $2 billion of our state's economy. Without the P3 initiative, the funding for these bridges would be pulled from other important interstate programs.
Madam Secretary, our time has kind of expired here a bit ago, but I was, wanted to obviously give you an opportunity for some additional time to talk. I'm hoping at this point you may be available for just a few questions from members of our panel here. You had mentioned that unfortunately it seems like the governor failed to recognize the importance of the public input, and that's what we have today, hearing from cross section of the community here that he wouldn't excuse you from the cabinet meeting. But that said, what time would you have any additional time for some questions at all?
Well, actually, sir, I was supposed to be off of this call by 10:45. I'm 10 minutes late, but Executive Deputy Secretary Melissa Betullo and Alternative Funding Program Director Ken McLean are on the call. They are the experts on this subject matter, and they would be available to answer any questions that you and other folks on the panel have. I apologize.
And I think we appreciate their expertise, but quite frankly, you're the one that has the ear of Governor Wolf, who's pursuing this, when this has been pursued previously more along a corridor side. So I do appreciate you taking time, what time you were able to this morning out of to be with us. I was really appreciative when we talked a couple weeks ago that you eagerly accepted the invitation. Disappointing you couldn't be here in snowy Clarion this morning, and that's not an April Fool's joke. You woke up here this morning and looked out and saw the snow. I thought maybe it was a big April Fool's joke, but disappointed that because your busy schedule, it's a shame you weren't able to make the trip to Clarion. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed that the governor doesn't recognize the importance of this discussion. To be able to get clarifications directly from you, and quite frankly, for you to hear directly from the communities and the different stakeholders here. But I appreciate your boss put a mandate on you, and you've got to be responsive to it. So.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. I know you're a supporter of transportation. You've helped out with other projects in the past. I look forward to talking to you in the future and collaborate and work together towards this major initiative. I really appreciate your interest in transportation. But you're in good hands. Melissa and Ken McLean, they're able to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you. Well, I think at this point we're, as we had promoted and getting feedback. I think we're going to move on to our second panel because we've got 4 great witnesses who are willing to be with us here for the entire time and invest their insights and their opinions on this issue, because these are the opinions of that really matter. Those that represent our communities when it comes to this. We've been in this battle before. I'm sitting here with allies that the last time when they were looking to pursue tolling of Interstate 80 as a corridor, and now they're just focusing down on basically double taxation. As the secretary said, this isn't to replace the gas tax or the incredible taxes that we have on our trucking companies, those federal excise tax and others. This is above and beyond. So this is layering taxes on. But so with that, we have our second panel, and I apologize to all the folks here that had, I know, great questions lined up for the secretary. We're going to move on to our second panel. 4 witnesses here. First of all, first like to introduce Rebecca Euler, is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association. It's a statewide organization founded in 1928 to preserve, strengthen, and promote the interests of the trucking industry. Before joining PMTA, Rebecca served as the Pennsylvania Legislative Director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses, where she did an outstanding job being a voice for our small businesses and an advocate. She managed the government relations, advocating on behalf of small businesses in the state. Prior to joining FIB, she worked in policy development, legislative advocacy, and project management in many areas of state government for nearly 20 years. Ms. Euler received her bachelor's degree in international relations from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree from Georgetown University in national security studies. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Kane. Ms. Kane serves as the communications director for the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates, which is a coalition of individuals, businesses, and organizations working to maintain the long-standing policy of protecting existing interstates from new tolls. Stephanie specializes in issue-based strategic planning, messaging development, media relations, grassroots advocacy, coalition development, and special events planning. Stephanie has her bachelor's degree in journalism and mass communications from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Tar Heels. I actually did a couple summer courses with the Tar Heels. Great barbecue. That's my commentary with Chapel Hill. Now I'd like to yield to Senator Hutchinson to introduce our next witness, Ms. Becker.
That's me.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Thank you, Congressman. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Tracy Becker, my friend and the executive director of the Clarion Chamber of Business and Industry. Tracy has been involved with the chamber since 1986 and was named the executive director
You might need to
oh, I'm so sorry. I had to unmute.
go and start again.
I'll start again. It is my honor and privilege to introduce my friend and the executive director of the Clarion Chamber of Business and Industry, Tracy Becker. Tracy has been involved in the chamber since 1986, and she was named the executive director in 2004. She's very involved in her community and serves on many boards, volunteering all across the community. She's also very involved in the Pennsylvania Association of Chamber of Professionals Board of Directors and is currently serving that organization as the treasurer. She's a member of the Clarion Rotary, serves as the member of their board of directors. She's also the chairman of the Rotary District 7280 ROVA leadership program. She's a past junior achievement board director, past senior regent for the Women's Moose Lodge Vacation Bible School director, and elder for the Sligo Presbyterian Church. She's also a Penn State Rural graduate and a Paul Harris Fellowship recipient, to name many other things. But what I want to say is that we've been in this fight before, and Tracy was in the front lines about 12 years ago when we were also battling the tolling of the entire corridor. And so it is definitely an honor and a privilege to have you here today, Tracy.
You're gonna have to unmute me again, sorry. Thank you. All right, thank you so much, and thank you, Ms. Becker, for being here today. Now I'd like to yield to Senator Hutchinson to introduce our last witness, Greg Lander.
Thank you, Congressman. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Greg Lander, who's Vice President of Claypeck Trucking Company. As in many small family businesses, he started at a very, very young age, doing small things and growing to bigger things to now being the boss. Greg is native of Congressional County. Very active in our community, and I'm sure today, although he's going to focus, as we asked him, on the impacts of tolling Interstate 80 on his business, he is so involved in our community, he cares about our community enough that we know he is very interested in the wider impacts on this tolling proposal would do really weighing down the economy here in northwestern Pennsylvania. So we are pleased, Craig, that you're able to join us today. You bring I call it an entrepreneurial gene. I've maybe showing my age, but know your grandfather, knew your grandfather well, and now we're under the third generation of Claypeck Trucking, and they are just a stellar business, very highly regarded by their employees, by the community, and you yourself are also. So thank you for joining us today, Greg.
And let me just add my thanks, Ms. Lander, for joining us today. And I'll now recognize Ms. Euler for 5 minutes to provide her opening statement.
Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Online as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you, Congressman Thompson, for having us here today. I'm so happy to be here in beautiful Clarion, beautiful snowy Clarion. I love it here and I'm happy to be back. And thank you to all the other members of the panel here who are here today to talk about this really important issue. We really appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the impact of bridge tolling on the trucking industry in Pennsylvania. I'm Rebecca Euler, President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association. We represent an industry comprised of 37,440 trucking companies in the Commonwealth, the majority of which are small family businesses. I am privileged to represent many wonderful businesses just like Mr. Lender's here today. The trucking industry employs more than 320,000 hardworking men and women in Pennsylvania. 1 in every 16 workers in the Commonwealth is employed directly in transportation, and countless other jobs are indirectly related. Our industry is critical to many others: manufacturing, agriculture, warehousing, supply chains, and essential consumer goods distribution depends on trucking in every corner of our state. When COVID-19 shut down most of our country, truck drivers kept our economy moving and continue to do so every day. The trucking industry is also one of the most highly regulated in the country. It's one of the most difficult to stay profitable in also due to the constantly increasing costs on the industry. First, I'd like to point out that the trucking industry is fully supportive of well-funded transportation infrastructure. Roads are our workplaces and our companies rely on highways being safe and efficient. However, the industry already pays a large portion of the bill, and this burden is affecting the competitiveness of Pennsylvania companies even now. The trucking industry pays almost 40% of transportation taxes in Pennsylvania currently, while operating only about 9% of the vehicle miles. In fact, taxes and fees make Pennsylvania the 3rd most expensive state in the country in which to operate a truck. A single PMTA member who operates 6 tractor trailers in their business, which is a typical small business trucking company, is now paying $45,000 more a year than in 2012, which is a crippling increase for a business that already operates on a razor-thin margin. Pennsylvania trucking companies compete for contracts every day against those in other states, and these additional costs set them back significantly. For many Pennsylvania companies, bridge tolling may be the final straw. Imagine if the member company I mentioned above is located near one of the bridges to be tolled. A $10 toll on the business's 6 trucks, which may need to cross a single bridge twice a day, will add over $31,000 a year to its operating costs. And of course, in the area where we are now, we're talking to 2 bridges on Interstate 80, which are proposed. So that would, of course, should a truck have to cross both of those bridges twice a day, would be $62,000 a year added to their operating costs. So of course, this puts Pennsylvania businesses at a competitive disadvantage with those in other states. When a Pennsylvania-based trucking company loses the contract to a business in, say, Ohio, the jobs, as well as the wages and taxes paid by that business and its employees, will move out of state with them. And the local businesses that depend on them must find trucking services elsewhere. Multiply this scenario across 9 bridges and thousands of companies, and the impact on the economic competitiveness of Pennsylvania businesses is clear. For these reasons, we believe that PennDOT's P3 bridge tolling strategy is the wrong approach to funding highways and keeping Pennsylvania's infrastructure sound. This proposal is a tax that will further contribute to making Pennsylvania's trucking industry uncompetitive and set it up for failure. Worse, it will create winners and losers depending on which side of the bridge a business is located on. We believe that, like all taxes, bridge tolling should be considered by legislators before PennDOT can proceed. For this reason, we'd like to thank Senator Langerholtz for introducing Senate Bill 382, which provides increased transparency for P3 projects and appropriate legislative oversight for proposals that have user fees. Legislators are best suited to weigh the pros and cons of policy proposals like this project. From a federal perspective, PMTA believes elimination of the interstate tolling exception for new, reconstructed, or replacement bridges and tunnels on which PennDOT is relying for this proposal should be considered. If it's to be preserved, this exception should be limited to single projects, require that analyses be conducted on the full impact of the proposal, including environmental, regional traffic, and economic studies, and require that the tolls that drivers pay be used only for the project and not diverted to unrelated other priorities. Trucking delivers America. The industry has gone above and beyond in one of the most trying years of our nation's history. As we move forward to recovery, we look forward to being part of the conversation about more fair and equitable solutions for transportation funding. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Euler. I now recognize Ms. Kane for 5 minutes to provide her opening statement.
Congressman Thompson, Secretary Gramian, and members of the panel, thank you for taking up this important issue. My name is Stephanie Kane, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates. Excuse me. Congressman Thompson, members of the panel, thank you for taking up.
Yep. Congressman Thompson, members of the panel, thank you for taking up this important issue. My name is Stephanie Kane. I'm speaking on behalf of the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates, a group that advocates against tolling existing interstates. Our many members who are Pennsylvania residents and businesses oppose PennDOT's Major Bridges P3 tolling initiative for a number of reasons. Tolls drive up the cost of living and commuting, hurting families and businesses. Tolls are a giant hidden tax on the supply chain, making them bad for business. Every new toll in Pennsylvania will put areas like Clarion at a competitive disadvantage and double tax drivers that have already paid for these bridges' construction and maintenance through state and federal gas taxes. Tolls are costly and complicated to run to the point of being fiscally irresponsible. For example, if you look at the North Carolina Triangle Expressway, an all electronic toll near Raleigh, North Carolina, in 2018, 37% of revenue went towards collection, operation, enforcement, and labor. This is the same type of toll that PennDOT is proposing to build. Or look in our own backyard at the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which recently earned the dubious honor of most expensive toll road in the world. What makes these tolls different? Taxpayers deserve for every dollar they provide to go towards road repairs, not propping up a new tolling bureaucracy. Furthermore, tolls cause traffic diversion onto alternate routes, and in the case of I-80's Canoe Creek and North Fork bridges, will cause diversion to entirely different parts of the state, such as scenic Route 6 or Route 22. In this way, tolls pick winners and losers and reroute prosperity around Clarion and other Pennsylvania communities. The only ones who truly stand to gain from this are toll operators, who will bring in millions of dollars in profits over decades-long contracts with the Commonwealth. Because we track toll programs nationally, I'd like to point out that PennDOT's toll program is particularly aggressive and has never been used at anywhere near the scale being proposed. If Pennsylvania pursues this, it will be entering into a never-before-seen federal approval process with no set timeline, standards of approval, or precedent. Worse still, this toll plan could open up the Commonwealth to a lawsuit. A tolling approach that seeks to minimize the impacts on Pennsylvania drivers through strategic placement of gantries, discounts that primarily benefit intrastate travelers, could be subject to a constitutional challenge for discriminating against interstate commerce. This is not a user fee, as usage is in no way tied to the costs paid. This is a truck toll program and is likely to fall victim to a lengthy lawsuit, similar to what the Rhode Island Department of Transportation is facing for using the same federal bridge exemption that PennDOT has zeroed in on. There are far too many unanswered questions regarding this toll plan. How much will the tolls be? How much money will the state receive? How will they calculate traffic diversion or revenues accurately if toll rates are not known? And how will traffic diversion affect I-80 communities and businesses and others across the Commonwealth? The lack of transparency in the major bridge P3 tolling and process has been glaring, with PennDOT coordinating P3 board's approval without disclosing project location and artfully dodging public commitments to sharing critical financial or economic impact studies. Hear me now, believe me later. The true impact of tolling I-80 bridges will be seen when I-80 businesses suffer and the rest of the state's economy suffers with it. As our nation seeks to recover from the devastating economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, ATFI hopes tolls will be rejected outright to protect citizens and businesses trying to regain their footing. The needs of Pennsylvania's transportation network are vast and deserve serious attention without the distraction of tolls. We urge you to dismiss tolling and focus on efficient, sustainable solutions. Thank you for your time. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kane. Your testimony is greatly appreciated. Ms. Becker, I recognize you for 5 minutes to provide your opening statement.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today with you all. When I heard about the proposed tolling of the Canoe Creek Bridge located in Clarion County, here in Beaver Township in Clarion County, I was extremely concerned of the economic impact this would cause all of our businesses in Clarion County in our future. To have 9 bridges statewide, 4 of them located on I-80, I was even more concerned. To have product come in to Clarion County be told, finished product going out be told, travel to pick up an item or product to be told, and to leave with that said product be told, there would be an average of 2 to 4 times that item could be told. So where does that go with the business? They're going to add it on. Where does it happen with the consumer? We take it out of our pocket. And now, after what we went through with 2020 with COVID-19, our businesses were shut down for 3 months. Those that were allowed to be told to be opened by the governor ran for 25%. And now you want the products that come in to replenish their stock to be told? This is extremely too much for our businesses as well as our residents. Our businesses are just hanging on and waiting for restrictions to be lifted to possibly 75%. They have been usually impacted financially. Now a proposed tolling of bridges. When is this going to stop? We want businesses to stay in Pennsylvania, not leave. We're ready to fight the fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate your testimony. And now recognize Mr. Lander. Recognize you for 5 minutes to provide your opening statement.
Thank you. And thank you for having me this morning. Excuse me. Sorry. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify in front of you today. My name is Greg Lander, and I'm Vice President of Claypack Trucking Company based out of Reno, PA. Claypack Trucking is a local employer employing near 100 individuals. We're constantly hiring. The majority of our employees come from the local schools and training facilities, making us one of the top employers in the area. Claypack Trucking is constantly updating our fleet, ensuring that we have the best equipment to service our clients. Most times we try to buy local made products and services. For example, our van trailers from Great Dane are manufactured in Danville, PA. This translates into a large economic impact for PA. We are opposed to PennDOT's P3 major bridge tolling proposals. This initiative, approved by the Wolf administration and the Pennsylvania's Public-Private Transportation Board, will force through a plan to tax Pennsylvanians by tolling 9 arbitrary bridges. I'm further displeased that the Wolf administration chose to announce the proposal so close to a holiday, squandering any potential blowback from the public. Then 3 months later, they announced the candidate bridges and said there's potential more will be selected. This is truly unacceptable. This attempt to overtax the motoring public will ruin business in PA. It is my belief that traveling through PA will be too expensive for shipping and truck organizations like Claypack Trucking. These tolls will elevate pricing of all materials in PA, making it impossible for companies to be competitive, forcing them to relocate out of our Commonwealth. Additionally, these tolls will make transportation for PA manufacturers harder to come by, just like how companies in New England states are having trouble finding trucks due to the expensive roads up there. KTC needs to stay competitive in the global transportation market. However, these tolls posed a significant threat to the way we do business. The tolls will force our drivers to drive more miles around the selected bridges to avoid the tolls. With the added expense of running around the tolls or even just paying the tolls, our company will not survive. We will have less accessible capital for buying materials and equipment like trailers. We will not be able to give our employees raises. We will not be able to hire new employees. These added tolls will even force us to look at moving to a more business-friendly state to get away from the obstacles we could face here very soon. Under this proposal, tolls of the 9 candidate bridges will be charging $1 or $2. That's what we hear, for every vehicle that passes through. Let me put that to you in terms of our business. This proposal, if this was to be implemented, Claypack Trucking, assuming our trucks use the same route that they use today, will spend more than $200,000 per year over just the 4 bridges on I-80, not to mention the bridges on I-79, 81, 83 that are to be proposed as well. Over the proposed 25-year period, Claypack Trucking alone would pay more than $5 million in tolls for the 4 bridges on I-80. This is just one small company. I have to ask, where else is all this money going to be squandered away to next? Furthermore, PA has the highest second gas tax in the US, which was just significantly raised a few years ago. The tax money currently received from fuel and road taxes should be used solely only for road repair and bridge repair, and not to replenish funds for other transportation areas and departments. PA has frequently complained that they need more money to fix and repair our infrastructure. Yet we'd never hear anyone ask where we can save money. It is my belief that we need to focus on areas of saving rather than spending more and more taxpayer money. In the private sector, if we cannot afford something, we have to make do without it or cut costs somewhere else. In closing, it is my hope PennDOT re-examines this proposal that we will have huge negative impacts on smaller companies like Claypack Trucking. This proposal should focus on ways to address our infrastructure needs rather than continue to spend and tax Pennsylvanians. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Greg, thank you so much. Really appreciate your testimony. I appreciate your family. When I was first, actually running in 2008, one of the first companies I met in Venango County was Claypack Trucking, and developed close relationships, and just have really appreciated watching how the economy moves through that trucking company, and trucking companies just like it throughout the country. I am going to I'm going to hold back my questioning to the very end because we've got a great panel here, virtual and in person, that I'm looking forward to hearing their questions to start with. And I think a great friend of mine, a colleague from the 9th Congressional District is participating here and participating virtually from out in the, we're in the Great Northwest, he's out in the Great Northeast. And so I'm going to yield to Congressman Dan Muser for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Congressman Thompson, my very good friend. I appreciate you very much, being the dean of our delegation, and thank you very much for bringing this together. This is certainly an important issue to our constituents and to the Commonwealth as a whole. As you well know, and those that are testifying, Pennsylvania has more state roads than New York and New England combined. The previous comments made by Greg Lander, I just couldn't agree with more. And that's where we need to be, what we need to be in touch with. Individuals that where the literal rubber meets the road, and where these government actions can be the most detrimental, and or if they're done right, beneficial. I did serve as the Revenue Secretary for the Commonwealth. I knew well back in 2011 that the motor license fund revenues were declining due entirely to increased fuel efficiency, since that is the primary revenue source, the gasoline tax. But at the same time, use of our roads was expanding and growing rapidly. Pennsylvania is the only state that funds its roads primarily 91% comes from the motor license fund, which is largely the gasoline tax and other motor vehicle fees. Minimal contributions come from our general fund. This is one of the reasons, not an excuse, but one of the reasons that we have the second highest gas tax in the United States. We are the Keystone State. Trucking is a top industry. We are the distribution hub to North America. As a matter of fact, 65% of the population of North America is a 10-hour drive from my district. Our roads are very important, our transit, our commerce. I have long thought the need for smart planning for our surface transportation needs, including, of course, roads and bridges, passenger rail, and a plan for pipeline and electric vehicles. We are here discussing a relatively small part of what a good plan should be, but frankly, it seems to be a bit spotty and somewhat random approach, particularly given to the president's announcement yesterday that proposes billions of dollars of transportation infrastructure, not yet turned into law, not yet passed by legislation, but it does include nearly $150 billion for highways and bridges to be distributed throughout the country. There has been to this proposal, by the way, widespread and resounding public opposition. We're hearing from our testifiers and certainly from concerned citizens throughout my district regarding this toll plan. The people we all work for clearly do not believe that there is a value proposition in this plan. They don't feel they'll be getting anything extra than that they already have. And yet they'll be paying these additional tolls and higher costs, disruption of traffic, perhaps, potentially curb commerce, particularly right after the most challenging year for small business in recent memory. I do appreciate the fact that there is a private investment component, a P3 component in this initiative. Yet on the same note, we have had nearly $11 billion in additional rescue plan put forth by largely the Biden and the Democrat caucus. So while we applaud a P3 initiative, in light of the fact that taxpayers have just been legislatively required to provide $1.9 trillion towards the American Rescue Plan, and a $2.25 trillion proposal yesterday funded by the taxpayers, I do think a change of plan from this toll initiative is warranted. It would be wise to use some of these funds already allocated and soon to be allocated, likely anyway, to cover the costs for these tolls that under this plan will be paid by Pennsylvania drivers, truckers, and small businesses. I actually introduced some legislation, an amendment to the 1.9 trillion bill, which would allow for states to utilize some of that funding. It's nebulous as to whether they can for transportation and infrastructure, but passage of this bill would allow it. So if we were asking questions of the secretary, and I'll just put this out for the staff, understanding they're not taking questions, but are they taking into consideration these high level of funds? Will they consider using those from the 1.9 trillion rescue plan to pay the tolls for Pennsylvanians and those doing commerce in Pennsylvania for at least a set period of time, so as a larger plan based upon the president's message yesterday can unfold, and we can make some better short-term and long-term decisions. But with that, Congressman Thompson, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this panel, and thank you again for putting together what should be an important hearing. Thank you, and I yield back. GTM.
The technology is only as good as the operator, right? So, so that means my technology is in big trouble. What I'd like to ask Representative Muser and all of our folks here, our elected officials as part of this panel, since the governor obviously did not want the secretary to respond to any questions conflicting with our hearing this morning, which they had many weeks notice of. I would ask that if you wouldn't mind, submit those for the record. Make sure I get your questions that you have for the secretary. We will put those in one document and we'll submit those. So if no objection to that, I just ask everybody's would do that. Now, please recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania's upper chamber, Senator Scott Hutchinson, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. Thank you all of you panelists for your testimony today. I wanted to dive into questioning. I think one of the cardinal sins that has occurred here is a lack of transparency. This proposal came at a time when the General Assembly was ready to dissolve itself for the year in the middle of the night, and it was implemented by a panel that is really has been a sleepy, unnoticed, and really haven't done a whole lot in their existence as a board, the P3 board. So nobody's watching them with bated breath until now. So they rolled out this proposal with no specifics, no specific bridges, no specific dollar amounts, just a general statement that they want to toll bridges on interstate highways, period. I'm curious, especially from Stephanie and Rebecca, both of you who are watching the bigger picture of transportation and transportation funding statewide. What you knew about this proposal, where you found out about it, was it before or after this board meeting that occurred in November? And just hear your general comments about the transparency, or in my opinion, very much lack of transparency that brought this proposal to being. And I'll start with you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Senator Hutchinson. That you make an excellent point. We learned about this from a release from PennDOT after the vote went out. I fully agree. It was the middle of the night proposal. Candidly, it was pretty artfully done if you don't want to get a lot of kickback. People
just
never...
like the secretary today. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. And we never see more opposition to tolls than when people realize that it will impact them directly in their daily lives. So the idea of withholding the project locations for 3 months, the strategic timing with the General Assembly and the limited number of days that you all would be able to respond in any kind of formal manner. It clearly was very well thought out and planned very well if you're trying to push a toll plan through. But it is not very transparent, and it raises, as I said in my testimony, there are a lot of questions, far too many, and they need to be more open with especially the economic impact studies that are coming. And there certainly are certain proprietary elements, but policymakers need to understand the impacts in order to make decisions about this, and tolls are not good public policy. And what we find is across the country, the more that policymakers learn about tolls and their impacts and understand how negatively they impact communities where they're located, they realize that they are not a good decision. And so it's very important that PennDOT be more transparent, since they haven't been up to this point, that now they need to be letting policymakers know exactly what these tolls will do to the economy of Pennsylvania.
Rebecca, we've done.
Sure, I can answer that from my organization standpoint. We did not know about the proposal until the P3 board voted on it. It was not publicly discussed, as you mentioned, that transparency is a real issue. But the other thing I'd like to point out is that the General Assembly has the ability to disapprove of P3 board actions, but the timeline, to Stephanie's point about when this was voted on in the P3 board, did not give the General Assembly, which, as you said, Senator Hutchinson, was dissolving and beginning a new session, The bridges were announced after the deadline had passed to disapprove of the P3 board resolution. So I think that's an important consideration. There was no ability for the legislature to meaningfully contribute or analyze what the actual projects were, or use their legal right to disapprove. So I think there was too little consideration given of a lot of the unintended consequences, which we've talked about here on the panel today. And those unintended consequences are what the General Assembly is uniquely able to bring to the table to advocate for their constituents. And that just simply didn't happen as a part of this process.
Thank you both. Points well made and very important points. One other I wanted to ask Greg, Mr. Lander, about something I just heard here today, and I'm sure you can verify the fact that Pennsylvania is the third most expensive state for trucking. Obviously, you've been able to make your way through that, but we get to a point of diminishing returns when they keep piling on. Is that correct statement there?
Yes, that's correct. And we're in the whole US environment, we have to compete against people from Ohio, from West Virginia, from all these other states that are so much easier to operate in and cheaper to operate in. And the requirements of Pennsylvania just keep stacking on. It's already a very difficult state to do business in, and we're in a larger market. It's not just right here in PA. I mean, we could ultimately operate out of anywhere if we needed to, and so that's something that we have to step back and take a look at this tolling.
Well, thank you. I believe I'm up to the end of my time, but I just wanted to say that, you know, on top of all the other struggles, from the immediate struggles like from COVID to the general struggle that our economy has had over the last several years, I just think that this is a ill-timed and terrible proposal, and we are here to oppose it to the very end. I thank the Congressman for calling today's meeting together. Thank you.
Now recognize
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you all for your testimony. It was absolutely spot on, and I believe really resonated with the residents of this area. I want to talk a little bit more about the diversion and the congestion that it creates when you have a toll on, in this case, a bridge. And I just, for the record, want you to know that when the secretary spoke to us about tolling two bridges on either end of Interstate 80, and we said that is tolling Interstate 80, she said, no, that's a tolling of a bridge. So we all know that it will create diversion, it will create congestion. And I guess I'll send it to you first, Tracy. Your office is right here in town. You know what happens when we have an accident on Interstate 80. Can you explain the impact to our community for those who are listening when we have a situation like that?
You're right. Whenever there's an accident, in fact, unfortunately, being 2 miles from Interstate 80, we get a lot because, again, we're Route 322, which was the main U.S. highway until Interstate 80 was even put in the 1960s. So truck traffic, people traveling, that's how they would go. So yes, when there's an accident, you see no other vehicles on the road except for just truck after truck. There could be hours, sometimes it's a day and a half. You're talking hundreds and upon hundreds. In fact, one time over this past winter month, we saw there was an accident, and that actually led to a second accident on two different locations on Interstate 80 that we sat in the office, so to speak, and counted in like a half an hour period time, probably 200 to 300 trucks. So again, when you have that going on, you don't have the locals wanting to drive into your community because they don't want to fight with truck traffic. They're not able to parallel park on Main Street. So our businesses are suffering, you know, and then I hear people going, don't go to Clarion. Everybody's on Facebook going, Don't go down to Clarion, don't go 322, don't go to Strattonville. You know, you want to bypass completely. And I think that leads into, you know, people find alternative ways to not get on 80. You know, people were already saying now that if they're going to toll, you know, these bridges, like you said, 2 on this side of the state, 2 on the other side of the state, they're finding alternative ways. So does that mean we're going to have more truck traffic coming into our communities? That's going to hurt our businesses.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that that leads into my next point in that we discussed this 10 years ago when this process was starting then, the impact to businesses who located along this corridor. It was not part of their business model. Mr. Lander, could you describe what that would do to your business model? I know that you did in some of your testimony, but the change after the fact, would you have located here? And you did mention that you would look at other locations. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
No, we've been located here since 1949. So we started out here. We try to stay here. As these hurdles coming our way, each one of these hurdles, we back when they were wanting to toll the whole interstate, you know, we had to look at it then. And now again with the tolling bridges, we have to look at it now. We compete in a larger market than Pennsylvania, so that has to be looked at that way. And if we need to move out of Pennsylvania, then that's what we need to do to stay alive. It's more of a survival mode type thing than anything else. And as far as businesses along the interstates, the truck stops, the I don't know, eating places, everything that has popped up along the exits of the Interstate 80, you know, look at the Turnpike. Everything is done in service plazas that are owned by the Turnpike Commission. There are no essential truck stops and establishments, small establishments down through there. So I think that will end up hurting all the establishments along Interstate 80 as well.
Thank you. I appreciate both of you answering my questions, and I do yield back. Thank you.
I thank the lady for great questions. Now recognize the Pennsylvania, our newest Pennsylvania senator, here in the region, Senator Chris Dutch, for 5 minutes. Oh, I was on. Never mind. Let me do it again. All right, let me get on muted. I now recognize Senator Chris Dutch for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Congressman. And on behalf of my successor in the House, Brian Smith, who is recovering from COVID, he sends his regards and wishes he could have been here, and he thanks you for the invitation. You know, Brookville, like Tracy was saying about Clarion, has 322 running right down the middle of it. It used to be known as the Lakes to Shore Highway, the main freight route between Cleveland and Philadelphia. When accidents happen out there, the trucks, you can't get out of a parking spot in Brookville. It's slant and parking. We have McCauley Trucking and Barber Trucking are very close to one of the exits on either side of that bridge, as well as Zach Rich has a drop-off facility where they drop trailers off and pick them up, and it helps them with their costs. Those trucks are going to be going through Brookville, plain and simple. There is no doubt about it. They will avoid that bridge, and I can't blame them. And what that will do for the commerce in the, I mean, we're trying to draw businesses back down into Brookville. It's going to have a huge impact. Another thing, I would like, Stephanie, if you could go back, that Rhode Island lawsuit, if you wouldn't mind expanding on that a little bit, because I'm very concerned with what the Commonwealth could be facing here in the future as a result of this action.
Certainly, yeah. So from a high level, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation is in a lawsuit with the American Trucking Association due to a truck toll system of bridge tolls that they implemented throughout the state, targeting trucks in particular. because our Commerce Clause of the US Constitution was written to encourage the free flow of goods. And as you know, 90% of goods in this country are delivered on truck, probably everything in this room and was on a truck at one point. And so when you target trucks, particularly, they noted that they were intentionally locating them at the border of the state to try to capture out-of-state trucks. And there have been comments from PennDOT about structuring tolls here. They've clearly been strategically located by some border areas, and also about potential discounts for local commuters because the uproar is the loudest from local communities. But when you structure tolls in that way, it becomes very clear who you're targeting and that you can be disrupting interstate commerce. And it does leave the state vulnerable to a lawsuit. And in Rhode Island, that lawsuit began in June 2018 and is still ongoing and has cost millions of dollars. And the taxpayers are footing the bill for RIDOT's ill-advised bridge toll plan.
Thank you. And Tracy, I would like you to expand a little bit on what happens with the manufactured goods, because that's another thing that we're targeting around here, is to try and bring manufacturing into our area. Would you mind expanding a little bit on how this will impact the raw materials and that sort of thing with businesses?
Well, here in Clarion County, we're fortunate that we have 5 housing manufacturers. So they're bringing in the raw materials as far as the lumber and things like that to build, but they're getting refrigerators, windows, even out of the Philadelphia area. So you're talking, if they're coming up I-80 or coming up, when you look at the map and you look at the potentials of the different places of where they can be tolled, it's not just one toll. You're talking probably 2 to 3 or 4 just to come into Clarion County with their raw product or their materials like their windows and refrigerators and furniture or whatever for the houses. And then the trucks are going to leave. Again, the trucking companies can only take so much cost. They're going to end up putting that cost onto their bill that's going to be passed on to the manufacturer. So every time that truck comes in for a business to build something, it's just going to be constant. Just like when you get groceries, you know, every time the trucks come in with whatever it is. I mean, I know like with our Walmart, they average 1 to 2 trucks a day. So every time that keeps going, prices are going to keep going up. And when does it stop?
We often don't see the second and third order impacts of what we're doing whenever things happen, policy decisions. And by the way, this whole thing is a policy decision. It should be left to the legislature because we recognize what happens locally. Brookville, the truck stop in Brookville used to be at one time the busiest truck stop in America. There was always, literally always, a fuel truck on the road to deliver a tanker load to that. And then when the fuel tax hit, all of a sudden Hubbard, Ohio ends up becoming the fuel center. So we have to start taking a look at these second and third order impacts. And I thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Congressman.
Thanks, Senator. Appreciate you being a part of this. And now I now recognize, understand that State Representative Brian Smith is participating virtually. So please recognize Representative Smith for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Can you hear me all right?
Hear you just fine.
All right. I'm a little challenged here from the house with my laptop and my capabilities, so I'm doing my best. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad I could get on here. I was a little late today. It took me a little bit to get on, but I just reiterate everything everybody's saying. It's sad that the secretary couldn't stay on this call and answer our questions. That is a little aggravating, I know. And to everyone else that spoke, as a trucking company owner for almost 20 years, I understand exactly what Claypac's going through, and the costs and everything that over those 20 years, how I saw the business changing was astronomical. So if we don't figure out a way to change what's going to happen right now, the traffic through Clarion, through Brookville, through communities all over the state where these bridges are going to be tolled will be terrible to our communities and to our local businesses. And I really hope that that PennDOT can find another way to fund these bridges, because I also agree that these bridges need to be built. The project at Norfolk and Brookville it'll be a nice bridge. It'll be much, much better. And we need that. The accidents that happen on that roadway since it was built have hurt a lot of lives over the years. So we need to get to that point. So thank you for letting me comment, and I yield back. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Representative. Glad to have you in the State House. You're doing a great job representing your area. Now recognize the chairman of the Pennsylvania Senate Transportation Committee. I believe I got that title correctly. Another friend that represents overlaps within my congressional district, Senator Wayne Langerholt, for 5 minutes of questioning.
And good morning. Thank you, Congressman. As I may be one of your most southern constituents, being from Richland Township, and you have such a large district, I know it goes from Richland Township up to the New York line, and but it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite, and it's an honor to work alongside of you to help the residents of Pennsylvania. I just wanted to clear something up, I think, a little bit from the beginning with some of the testimony, and it was referenced as well from some of the other panelists. I introduced Senate Bill 382 when I became the chair of the Transportation Committee back several months ago, and was getting up to speed with everything that we're facing. And we were facing many challenges. That's not any any shortage of language here. This was one of the issues that we saw early on, that this was kind of lurking under the water, and it was going to rear its head whenever it was going to be announced. And this P3 board that was done, and I think my colleague Senator Hutchinson mentioned it too at the outset, that the way that this was done, and just for the record, to the extent that we are creating a record here, this P3 initiative was the resolution was November 12th of 2020, and then there were certain periods, a certain period granted that the General Assembly could weigh in. Now, the problem with that, and what led me to introduce Senate Bill 382 was that you all know in December, half of our members aren't sworn in. So technically we cannot, take action on that. Now, in addition to that, I want to make it very clear here how this was enacted. And even to this day, there is no definitive plan for bridge tolling. There is no definitive structure. We don't know who's going to be doing the tolling. We don't know what the size or scope of it looks like. We don't know the fees that are going to be generated. We don't even have a concrete figure on what it looks like. So for them to say that we had the opportunity to weigh in November 12th, and I don't have it in front of me. I had it when we gave a press conference in Harrisburg. It's a one-page resolution that said we are hereby enact the P3 statute in no uncertain terms. That's it. That's it. And converse or ironically, we had to request that resolution from PennDOT. So, as far as this, testimony, this is a transparent and everybody had the opportunity to weigh in. No, that's what led me to introduce Senate Bill 382. And we need to get this passed to bring more accountability to the process here so that we know what is happening. Were the stakeholders met prior to? I think so. I mean, you could tacitly say that, but for them to say, or for the department to indicate that this was, this plan was put forth to the stakeholders, prior to this, to all the chambers, that's simply untrue. And is it my understanding that there are members of PennDOT still on the call? Because I do have some specific questions with regard to that in the last bit of my questionings here.
I don't know for certain, but I suspect there will, some of the technical experts that the governor or the secretary made reference to may be on the call.
Okay, I think
Melissa and Ken.
Okay.
So
I have a couple quick questions here. The first one I would ask to whoever wants to handle it. Isn't it accurate that PennDOT, that the department, has already expended taxpayer dollars in furtherance of this initiative on ancillary costs such as consulting and legal fees? And you're muted.
There we go. I think I got it now. So yes, I mean, with the P3 board approval, we have moved forward with these projects and begun the environmental phase, which is an important component as you look at the impacts of the projects to those local areas, what those diversionary routes will be. So of course, we're incurring those engineering fees.
How much money was spent on that so far to date?
Oh, I don't have that in front of me today. I could certainly get back to you on where we're
Would
at.
it be
with those
fair to
expenditures.
say that it's a ballpark of around $40 to $50 million?
Oh, I do not believe that's the case at all, sir. Again, I'll have to circle back, but I mean, these are very large projects, and the engineering involved with that is very significant.
Now,
But as far as the
respect, I want to
time,
move on real quick because we're limited for time. But with respect to these costs that have been incurred, is it accurate that the firm that was engaged on this, or one of the firms that was engaged, was not a Pennsylvania company?
all of these firms have offices within Pennsylvania. If you're talking the corporate structure or where their headquarters are, again, I don't have that in front of me today, but this is part of, I'll say, a lot of the firms we deal with work in multiple states.
What dates were these contracts executed?
Some of these are contracts that we already had in place before all this began through what's called open ends. So the exact dates that those were executed, those haven't been recently engaged for the work to date. We do have some active procurements that are going on right now.
Okay. And is there actually, those are all the questions that I have for the department this time. And I'll yield back. I thank you, Congressman.
All right. Hey, Senator Langerhold, thank you so much. Senator Langerhold, thank you so much. Privileged to be able to work with you and serving, and you may be among my most southern constituents. That's why I'm so blessed to have a southern, in my case, I'm blessed to have a southern border and a northern border. It's all good and everything in between. And thank you for your oversight with transportation, with your role as chairman. I'm surprised that, quite frankly, that as chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, I would have think that the governor and his team would have be forthcoming with all this information, that you wouldn't have to be asking these tough questions, that they'd be proactively working with you on this. And thanks for your leadership in Senate Bill 382. Now I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Venango County, serves more than just Venango County, but a state representative, Lee James, for 5 minutes.
There we go. Hopefully you can hear me now. Much has been said today. I want to echo my thanks to the panel for your excellent testimony. And I think I would like to frame some questions, not for the panel that's present, but for Ken and Melissa to take back to Secretary Gramian. It's truly unfortunate that the Secretary couldn't find a way to stay with us at this time, or why the governor decided to yank her out of here. But some of the questions that I believe need answered, and need answered very quickly, to kind of summarize what we've been talking about today. First of all, what's the legal standing for imposing all these new tolls? And can you, good luck with this one, can you justify the timing of the announcement to coincide with the changing of the guard, so to speak? Number two, reference was made to a new committee that is studying other means of raising revenues for construction and maintenance. I would think, knowing that this hearing was coming up, that the Transportation Secretary would have had some ideas to share with us about what's going on in that committee, and what, I won't say it's time for decision making yet, but what sources of revenue are being considered. Number three, everybody here believes that it's inevitable that traffic will be rerouted. So in your studies, by all means, not just DEP studies, but economic studies, can we get to the bottom of what the costs are going to be to roll more trucks and more more traffic, such as we drove here today, on the communities through which these vehicles are rolling. Are we going to set aside some funds to help them pay that? I don't know. None of this has been really discussed today. And finally, to echo the previous speaker, what factors are actually being considered when you're getting around to setting the toll amounts, and will they be sunsetted if this comes to pass, which I'm not saying it will, because nobody in this room is for it. Will those tolls be sunsetted? There's at least 4 questions right there for which I know I'm not going to get an answer today, but I would love to hear back from the secretary. I'm sure we all would. That's all, sir. Thank you. I yield back.
Representative James, thank you so much. Those are great questions. We will, I want to on mute. Representative James, those are great questions, much appreciated. And just once again, without unanimous consent, without objection, I'd like to ask all of our all those who are sitting here today to submit questions. And get those to me and my staff, and we will. You've delivered yours to some of the secretary's team, but we'll put those in writing and insist on a response to each of those questions. So I'm going to take the liberty. I reserve my last 5 minutes for myself, so I'm going to start right away. Rebecca, Ms. Euler, I'd like to start my questioning with you. As I read in your testimony, and I couldn't help but agree with you more, that our trucking delivers America. And if this plan were to be implemented, the trucking industry in Pennsylvania will face severe financial consequences, resulting in hardships for the American consumer. And I think we would see commerce detour Pennsylvania. And that's not what we want. We need to develop commerce here. We need to grow. I mean, I was just at a new, it's kind of in Clarion County a month or so ago. It's an old site that's been sitting dormant, breathing new life into it. But we had that discussion that day. What would happen if there would be a return to tolls in any form on Interstate 80? How would that add to the cost of business? Would that tip the scale where this just is not a competitive place to do business? And so those are real consequences that right now business owners are considering. Just the fact that the governor's team is talking about this is creating such uncertainty. And uncertainty impedes economic growth. So Rebecca, are we, as we look for more equitable and viable solutions, does PMTA have any suggestions on finding a reliable mechanism for transportation funding while increasing competition in the industry?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. It is a very important one, obviously. And because we had talked a few minutes ago specifically about manufacturing and the impact on our manufacturers here in Pennsylvania, I can tell you that 96.2% of manufactured tonnage in our state is transported by truck. So when we're talking about economic impact, that is a huge impact on our manufacturers here in Pennsylvania, which obviously we're trying to encourage manufacturers to come and to stay in Pennsylvania. So that is an important unintended consequence that we need to talk about. But generally, I mean, we agree that transportation funding infrastructure is critical. We need to do it, but we need to do it in a way that just doesn't disproportionately affect or target specific areas of the state or specific industries. That's the most important thing I think we need to remember, because tolls really are a second tax on public infrastructure that we're all already paying for, that infrastructure. So I think the first thing I want to mention is just to sort of follow up on what Mr. Lender had talked about briefly, is the need to look at existing transportation funding, reprioritize that funding, and make sure we're focusing it on roads and bridges where it needs to be. If we're truly in a crisis situation, which I think, a lot of people are making the case that's where we are, well, then let's look at what we're already raising, the taxes that we already have, and make sure we're focusing them on roads and bridges. The first thing we would need to do along those lines is to stop diversions of transportation funding. That would mean finding alternative funding for state police, which is 11 cents on every gallon of fuel tax that we pay going to state police. From the Turnpike's perspective, they fund mass transit systems. So that's less money. And we know the Turnpike is in dire financial condition because of that. We need to find alternative funding mechanisms there. And we also need to take a look at other areas where money's being spent that could be repurposed, I think. For example, the existing red light enforcement money that's raised is going into a grant fund. Maybe that should go into the general transportation funding program, or the $5 optional county registration fee. Maybe it should not be optional. Maybe we should look at making that a funding mechanism for our transportation needs in our counties. And then I would also say, I think we need to look at whether there are other innovative ways that PennDOT can spend its money. I know they like to point to the Rapid Bridge Replacement Program as a successful P3 that was in place over a number of years. But that, I want to point out that program reduced the costs that PennDOT pays for infrastructure. It didn't create a P3, which taxes existing infrastructure and charges the user directly for the profit of a private entity. It was designed to lower PennDOT's costs. I think that's an appropriate use of a P3, and maybe we can find other ways to use P3s appropriately, maybe on mass transit. Maybe we can talk about that. Just throw that out there. But rather than imposing the cost directly on the user, let's talk about how PennDOT can use those models more effectively. And then because Representative James had mentioned the TROC, of which I'm a member, the Transportation Revenue Options Commission, we did receive a list in last week's meeting of potential fee and tax increases that we could choose to fill the budget gap that PennDOT says they have. And my hesitancy about that is there was no conversation about the things I just talked about, how to repurpose existing funding, how to find efficiencies that could use that funding more efficiently and usefully. We were only given a list of taxes that could be raised. I think there's a much bigger discussion that's involved there that we should have. And there were some things on the list I think that are reasonable. For instance, electric vehicle fees, I think is a reasonable solution that a lot of people would agree on. An examination of registration fees for cars and trucks, and are they at an appropriate level? I think that's a fair conversation to have. But I think we need to have a bigger conversation than that as well. And the last thing I'll mention, because it did come up here with regard to, I think it was Congressman Muser who mentioned the stimulus money. PennDOT has some great data on the jobs and economic development opportunities that transportation infrastructure funding creates. Short and long-term impacts. And I think that's a perfectly appropriate use of federal stimulus funds, that we should have that serious conversation. I do think it would be a shot in the arm, which is what the stimulus was designed to do. So I think that's a conversation we need to have as well.
Thank you very much. I think there will be some additional questions. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to take the liberty of just a little additional time to get some additional questions in here as we wrap up today. Mr. Lander, in your testimony, you mentioned that the proposal will affect your business in more than one way. As a local employer, can you elaborate on how this proposal will affect your hiring decisions in the future? Will you be able to maintain a qualified and trained workforce?
At this point, we're used to being able to hire people and pay them well for what they do. If we have to pay for tolls, pay for trucks to drive around tolls, the extra miles, whatever way we need to go, that will limit, the trucking companies have a very thin margin. And so anything that comes out of that margin, we have to take a look at the whole scheme. So hiring people, paying people well like we do, will have to be looked at as well. Maybe, I don't know, would it bring in less talent? I'm sure it would. It's all in how, where pay and tolls and everything come out to, but but most definitely it would end up being a lesser talent compared to what we are used to now.
Thank you. Ms. Lander, as a local businessman, and Ms. Becker, as the executive director of the Clarion Area Chamber of Business and Industry, obviously you've got the pulse of businesses in our region. My first question is, what does this do to the disposable income of, we've been talking about the businesses, but the employees, and the employees whose commute to get to these work sites may take them over their bridges. These bridges, it seems like that's a significant hit on their, at the end of the day, on how much income they actually have left over to compared to what they have now. And so I'll yield to either, we'll start with Tracy. Any thoughts on that?
You're right. I mean, that's one of the things I don't think people took into consideration. So if the employees traveling to work are now paying tolls, they're going to look for higher paying jobs. And our businesses are struggling now, with the talent that they have, with wages and things like that. Plus, if traffic is backed up because people are diverting off I-80 to get away from the bridges, again, your communities are going to be a larger traffic, so people are going to wait in traffic as well. So I think the workers are going to struggle with it. They're already struggling. So adding this on top of it is, when's it going to stop?
Yeah, and given the fact that there's no discussion about reducing the amount of gas tax that we pay already in rural America, because we commute everywhere. We commute to work, we commute to pick up our groceries, sometimes we commute to pick up our mail. And so it's a part of rural life, and we get that part, we accept that. But this is just piling on. This isn't replacing, it's piling on to an inefficient run system, it seems like. And one that's, as we heard, is probably outdated given fuel efficiency. Tracy, you give us insight. You do have your pulse on the communities in Clarion and surrounding areas. What are you hearing? What's the business community in Clarion as well as other areas feel about this proposal?
What they feel, I can't say, right? Because it's not good. I mean, I think there's so many mixed emotions. There's frustration. I mean, what we went through as a country, as a world in 2020, the financial impact on these businesses. I mean, there's businesses that are just hanging on. There's businesses that weren't eligible to get the PPP money. There's businesses that are right now waiting to open up to full capacity and hope that they can still be here a year from now. There's, trucking companies that I know that I've talked with that have said, we're already looking at, how are we going to divert our traffic not to be on Interstate 80? And I'm thinking, okay, right here in downtown Clarion with Route 322, I'm concerned. So if people aren't coming into our businesses in downtown, Brookville, Clarion, across, the Commonwealth, what's that going to do? So I mean, the impact, businesses are frustrated. And then again, like I said earlier, the additional costs, because the trucking companies can only take so much. They're going to pass it on to the business that they're delivering to. The business is going to pass it on to the consumer. The consumer is going to be like, I only have so much of the pie that I can do. They're going to start limiting what they're going to do. And when does it stop? It just needs to, I think what was said earlier, when you look at the turnpike, who wants to travel it? I know I don't like to. I will look for ways to go around so I don't have to. It is the worst highway. So is that what's going to happen to I-80, I-81, I-76? Again, we're driving people out of Pennsylvania. We're driving businesses out of Pennsylvania. It has to stop. There has to be alternative ways. And again, I like the idea of looking back at the registration fees. Those have not been looked at. And our gas tax is the highest in, second, third across the United States. We all have to, I appreciate the fact that we're all here together having a conversation. It would be nice to have the governor to have the conversation. He won't travel here. In all the years that he's been in office, he's not been here. Why is that? He doesn't, in my mind, doesn't care about rural Pennsylvania. He cares about himself.
Thank you. I am one of those who will attest to the fact that I have the opportunity. It would be quicker, most times it'd be quicker for me to take for a short time a portion of the turnpike to get back and forth to Washington, and I take alternative routes. It's going to take me longer, but I take secondary rural roads to bypass on the turnpike because of they kind of make you numb to it, right? Because Easy Pass, you don't even pay attention to what you're paying today. That I appreciate the convenience, but perhaps maybe there's a reason for the Easy Pass so the consumers don't know how much. And the best of my understanding, and there's a lot of folks in the room here would probably know better than me, but my understanding is when the turnpike was built, it was only going to be tolled until it was paid for.
Yeah.
And now it's the most expensive toll road in the world. So that didn't work out too well. Now, my final question is for last but not least to Ms. Kane. Stephanie, the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates is vehemently against tolling as a means of transportation funding. Through your work, have you seen other states use alternative funding options besides tolling to fix their bridges, their roads, and other transportation needs? If so, can you elaborate?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. That really is the question: is how do we pay for transportation? And unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. There's no one funding mechanism that's going to cover it all and do everything we needed to do. But so states need to look at a blend of funding resources. So things that we've seen used successfully in other states are things like registration fees, fees on electronic vehicles. Those can be administered through the DMV, or even we could consider in the future, maybe it comes through your income taxes or something like that. The motor fuel tax at both the federal level and at the state level. One important thing about the fuel tax that I think is left out of this conversation too often is that how low the administration cost is. It's less than a penny on the dollar, whereas that North Carolina Triangle Expressway I brought up is 37 cents on the dollar. So just think about how much money is never going to the road. So even if we don't like the idea we have a high gas tax in Pennsylvania, at least it's efficient. And you don't need to spend millions of dollars building new tolling gantries. The capital costs of tolls are enormous, including all the studies that need to be done. And I think that the economic impact studies that PennDOT will be looking for will be very rosy projections that just show money, 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 and don't consider all of the economic impact to businesses who are hurt by it and all of the communities around the tolls, to the municipalities surrounding tolls that need to that they are not expecting this traffic diversion. Their roads weren't built for it, so they get chewed up and deteriorate faster. Increased accidents mean more public first responders and more police who are needed. And so really what our point is that there are options that come with far fewer negatives than tolls. Tolls have the longest list of drawbacks and costs. They have collection costs, they have capital costs, they have economic costs, they have social costs, societal costs, quality of living. And so that really is what we are united as the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates, is that tolls in particular on existing interstates. Or even if you were building a new road and wanted to toll that actually is something our organization does not fight against. We are united in that you should not implement a toll on a road that is paid for by the gas and fuel, the fuel taxes. So we just think that tolls in general should be removed from the conversation for paying for these bridges.
Stephanie, thank you very much. I think what would help this more and more, and this is a clear message for, mostly for the executive branch in Pennsylvania, is we need Pennsylvania to be open for business. And you put more tolls, you're putting more barriers, you're putting more costs, you're driving up costs, and in the end, you're putting businesses out of business. We're losing employees. Quite frankly, you're hurting the bottom lines of businesses that, quite frankly, pay taxes on their bottom lines, on their profits. And so I know that the way we've always done it, and that seems to be the mentality. We've always done it this way. They've never really none of the past administrations have proposed taking money out of the operating budget of the Commonwealth to help fund transportation. It's all kind of been on the back of transportation. As we've heard today, there's significant non-direct roads and bridges aspects, our wonderful state police who are heroes, and probably other things that are funded out of the transportation dollars. That doesn't work anymore. And I would say, especially as we saw evidence of, as I reported, the state revenue, it came in 28% more than what was projected. If we can get Pennsylvania open for business and let that revenue fly, there's very few things. I would say workforce is a very important part of the economy, obviously, and that's something I've always been dedicated to leading on. But I think our infrastructure is something that creates economic activity. And therefore, and how much do we invest now in the Commonwealth? I think I've watched my colleagues in Harrisburg do a really good job of trying to direct resources to economic opportunities for growing businesses through whether it's loans or sometimes grants or different ways. And we do that, and you do that because it's good for the economy. Well, quite frankly, our roads and bridges are good and great for the economy because that's where the commerce moves. Folks like Claypick Trucking and all those trucking companies out there, everything moves by truck at one point or another. And so, as we look I'm in Washington. So as you look outside the box, as the executive branch looks outside the box, I kid around. I tell people when I'm driving to Washington, I get to Harrisburg, I speed up. But as the folks who are responsible for that need to look at, there should be a role. If this is economic development, our roads and bridges, then let's get Pennsylvania open for business. Let's do the right things to grow that economy. Let's use the resources that we've been blessed with, the energy, the natural resources, and in a robust way, grow this economy. And then we're going to have to be creative. There's different things and maybe some tough decisions would be made, but I would say a portion of that as if you can light a fire under the economy in Pennsylvania, it's an appropriate investment to at least invest in a portion of that into our roads and bridges. So with that said, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. And I believe this hearing was productive and gave us good information for us to digest and come back to the table to find viable solutions that work for Pennsylvanians and address our transportation infrastructure funding issues. And with that being said, and being no further business, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thank you.